Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Spirit Side Podcast. I'm your host, Paul James Caden, and today I feel that I have a really interesting show that I want to share with all of you. And I hope you'll stick with me till the end of this one, because I think we're going to ask some questions that are really important for all of us to be thinking about right now. And those questions might not be what you think they're going to be. And we're going to delve a little bit in this show into the spiritual, the prophetic, maybe a little bit into the religious, if you will. But we're not going to be preachy. We're not going to try to convert anybody. And I want you to know, this is not one of those shows that is going to be crying, the end of the world is nigh. God is judging us all. So don't read the title. Don't listen to the intro of this podcast and think that's where I'm going to go with all of this. In fact, I would say the exact opposite, but maybe not in a way that you think. This is just some really interesting stuff that I've been thinking about, that I've done a little bit of a study and some research into, and I hope you'll listen, because I think this is important stuff in the day and age that we live in right now. Now, I'd like to start out by saying that you don't have to look very far to see a lot of religious folks saying that, this is the end of time. The coronavirus is a judgment from God, as well as a lot of these erratic weather patterns and earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and things like out of control wildfires in Australia. So much going on in our world, and they're saying, this is it. This is the beginning of the judgments from God. We're entering into the last days. You better get ready. You better be prepared. And so, I'm certainly sure that all of us have heard this commentary somewhere along the line in our lives, whether it be from a family member, someone in our community, someone at work, someone online, someone on social media. It's really everywhere that people are making this declaration. And, I would like to start out by saying, most of you probably know, if you're new to the show, I was once upon a time very much immersed in the fundamentalist evangelical Christian sect of religion. Now, I left that over 20 years ago. And I did so for, what I feel were some very good reasons. One of which I always had a problem with, even though back then, and even still today, I'm interested in, the study of prophecy, things that have been uttered or written down in the far-flung past, and they came to pass, in our modern world. I'm very interested. I find it fascinating, this topic of what many call end-time prophecy. I do believe that there will be, as some say, a final day. But I think it's going to be a bit different than most people believe it will be. And that's one of the issues that I had as a fundamentalist evangelical, is that everything that happened in the world, every headline that was in the news, They all cried all the time, this is it. This is the end. This is the beginning of the end. Jesus is about to return. And it was always, always crying wolf. The sky is falling. This is the end. I mean, you can go back and, find books, things like, it was something like 50 Reasons Why Jesus Will Return in 1984. 99 Reasons Why Jesus Will Return in 1999. Then we had, droves of books that predicted the end or the beginning of the end in 2000 with Y2K. I mean, it goes on and on and on. We had folks like Harold Camping that predicted the end of the world on May 21st, 2011. It didn't happen. And then he moved it up to October 21st, 2011. And, when these things fail to come to pass, they always say, well, it wasn't the literal end or the literal rapture, but it had a spiritual significance that, they always make excuses why it didn't happen, but it always had a spiritual significance afterwards. But you have a slew of people. Those of you who are familiar with the doomsday televangelist, there was Jack Van Impe, who predicted the end in 1990, 1995, 2000, 2010. I mean, there were various dates set by him that the world was going to end. It was just something that never felt right to me, even when I was immersed in that particular religion. Even with the Left Behind books, I would read some of those and say, this doesn't feel right to me. And I used to tell a lot of my evangelical fundamentalist Christian friends back then that, I think all of this doomsdaying and, saying this is exactly how it's going to pan out in the final day, I think most of us are in error. And we hear a lot of Christians talk about being deceived, but maybe we're deceiving ourselves. We're locking ourselves into these doctrines and dogmas that this is how it's going to happen. And if the way that it happens is different, we might shy away from it and avoid the very thing that we need to actually be taking a closer look at. Because what if this is different than we think it's going to be? And they would all say, oh, no. Great scholars and, teachers like Tim LaHaye and Jack Van Impe and John Hagee and, all these people, they've really studied this out for years and, they know how pretty much all of this is going to kind of work out in the end. But inevitably, it didn't. And I think we're falling into that same trap right now. And a lot of people are in a panic. Judgment Day is coming. Jesus is coming. This is what's going to happen. So let's break it down. I did a comparative study over the last, I would say, 3 days, maybe 4. And I've been looking at various religions and what they have to say about what's happening in our world right now with all of these crazy weather patterns, especially the coronavirus, and what are their take on it. Now, as usual, I'm very hard pressed to find anybody from the Christian community who is not saying that this is a judgment from God. They're all saying it. This is God's judgment beginning. This is the beginning of the end. You better be ready. Jesus is coming. This is this is just the start of it. I actually, over that 3-4 day period, have not found one pastor or preacher or practicing Christian, who said that this wasn't a judgment from God. All of them, pretty much across the board, are saying this is the wrath of God. This is Judgment Day. The end is nigh. When I look at the Muslim perspective, it's actually a bit different. Some of them, the more radical Muslims, are saying, yes, this is a judgment from Allah. He's punishing, the people and, the inhabitants of the earth. But most Muslims, scholars and moderates, are saying that, hold on a minute. We can't go out there and start saying that this is a punishment from God or that this is the wrath of God because we don't know. If we go out there and start saying, well, this is the punishment of God on a certain nation or a certain people or the world, we're doing what the Quran tells us not to do. And that is speak things about God that we know not of. We're being presumptuous and saying, God said this, or God is doing this, or this is how God is. They're saying we can't do this. They're also looking at verses in the Quran that say the ultimate punishment and reward of the believer and the non-believer is in the hereafter, in the afterlife. I mean, it's certainly, there can be judgment or punishment on the earth, but they look at verses and say, well, there's verses where God says, if I punished man for all of his wrongdoings all the time, there wouldn't be anyone left. So there is mercy, there is forgiveness, there is the waiting period and hoping man will repent or turn his life around. So it's quite different where we have the Christian saying this is ... And then we have the Muslims who say, hold on a minute, don't speak so soon, or don't speak of what you don't know about, saying this is from God when you don't know the mind of God. And from the Muslim perspective, I heard several individuals make a statement that I myself have been thinking about and have thought many times in the past and even in the present when I would see things happening, like maybe the breakout of SARS or an earthquake or some natural disaster or, the tsunami that happened years ago. And people would say, that's a judgment of God, that hurricane, that tsunami. And there's always something that I looked at and said, I don't know about that because. And now I'm seeing, different people in the Muslim community saying that same because. They're not sure about this because. And now the because is, in the Bible and in the Quran, it does talk about there will be a final day, a last day. Some people call it the apocalypse, the cataclysm. Call it what you will. But that moment is reserved for the uber wicked in our world. Those who kill, who steal, who destroy, who oppress the people, make war, who turn away from the ways of love and righteousness and goodness. And even when they see signs that there is a God and the final day is approaching, they will still refuse and say, nope, we hate you, we refuse, we're going to continue in what we're doing, our plan, our agenda. And these people are judged. There is, as some people say, wrath, judgment. But that wrath and that judgment is not reserved for the common people or those who, people of faith. And so the Muslims are looking at the coronavirus and they're saying, if this is a judgment from God, why isn't it affecting many of these corrupt leaders and governments and systems of government and people in what, many call the shadow government? The greedy, the powerful, those who are trying to manipulate the environment on the earth, polluting the earth, putting poisons in our food, all these different things that these people do for profit and for greed. These people who think genocide is okay and they want population control. Many Muslims are looking at it and say, why is something like the coronavirus and many of these disasters just affecting the poor, the children, the elderly, the common folks? Why isn't it affecting these very wicked people? Because that's what the judgment of God is supposed to be. The common people, the people of faith, are to be preserved through a lot of these judgments, or wrath, if you will. And folks, that's a really good question, and one that I have asked myself for years. If this is the beginning of the end, if this is a judgment from God, why is it only the common people, the poor, the elderly, the disabled, the children, the young? Why are all these people in their ivory towers and palaces? Why are the Pings and the Netanyahus and the Trumps and the Putins and all these corrupt politicians and leaders and their constituents, why are they still walking around with big smiles on their faces, carrying through with their agendas? And not a one touched by any of this. And that makes me ask the question, why? Is it because a lot of these things that are happening, including the coronavirus, are man-made disasters? Are these elitists, as I said in one of my other podcasts a week or so ago, are they using the Bible as their handbook to try to stage events that look like the last days? because the common people are going to say, oh, this is the hand of God. This is the last days. This is God's work. We just have to sit back and passively let it happen. And by doing that, these elitists can try to manipulate the weather. They can release bioweapons on the public. They can do whatever they want to do. Get their population control, their genocide, whatever it is they're trying to do. And nobody's the wiser. Because all of these people are supposed to be so religious and spiritual, but you don't see any of them going, maybe I better change my ways because things in the world are looking pretty bleak and pretty weird right now. We don't see any of them doing that. They're gleefully following through with their crooked agendas, full speed ahead. Not a thought of turning their lives and their thoughts and their policies and their countries around at all. It's only the common folk out here in the mass populace who are saying, oh, it's the end of days, we better repent, we better turn our lives around, we better do things differently. Are we being had? Because anybody who does any research into any of this, and they'll say, well, no, that's just conspiracy theory. Well, no, it's not. There are plans from our politicians here in the United States, people in the United Nations. I mean, all over, there are these plans that these people have gotten together and talked about. How do we get the world to come together as one into the new world order? One currency, one government, one little group in charge of everything. How do we get nations to just let go of their sovereignty? How do we get the people to conform? And there's all these different plans on how they might do that, some of which are actually staged end time events to make the people think the end is coming. They have to conform to certain things that are happening on the earth. There's things like a staged rapture, a staged second coming of Jesus, staged UFO invasions. I mean, there's all kind of crazy things out there. Now, how they're going to pull this off, I don't know. But it's always been something these have always been thoughts that have been on the table to control and herd the masses in a certain direction. So is that what we're seeing with all these weather patterns that are out of control, coronaviruses? I mean, you don't have to look very far to see that, since the 1940s, the governments and the militaries of the world have looked for ways to control and own the weather. And they're still talking about that right now. You hear about chemtrailing and people say, oh, no, it's just contrails. Ha, ha, ha. I'd say you better do your research because it is all over the place from politicians and scientists and people from top universities talking about these particulates that they're not going to put in the atmosphere, but are putting in the atmosphere to supposedly slow global warming. But they don't know what the ultimate consequences of this will be on our weather. There could be disastrous weather. They don't know what the health risks are to animal, plant, and human, but it's a risk we got to take to try to save the planet. I mean, the list goes on and on. I mean, this isn't a podcast about conspiracy theory and what is true about it and what is false about it. But the idea is this what we're seeing and what so many religious people are falling into the trap saying, oh, this is the judgment of God. Oh, this is the hand of God. Oh, this is the beginning of the end. Oh, don't try to do the right thing and get these crooked politicians out of power and turn our lives and our countries and our nations and our governments around. Let's just sit back passively and watch the skies, because Jesus is coming back any day now, because this is the end. Are we being had? And do many people in our religious communities have this absolutely, completely wrong? Because only as many in the Muslim communities are asking, is this right to say this is the wrath of God? Is this right to say this is from God? And why is it affecting it? Why are these things only affecting the people who are maybe really not supposed to be affected so much, while all these really wicked, evil people who the judgment and the wrath is supposed to be for are completely unscathed? And they're saying, this isn't God. This isn't how God operates. We need to take a second and more serious look at this and what we're saying. And I'll tell you what, I agree with them. And if a lot of what's happening is not by the hand of man or the manipulation of man and the agendas of wicked men, then what is it? Is it something else? What are we missing? What are we not seeing? What are we refusing to see? Because religion has blinded our eyes with so much of its doctrine and dogmas that we can't even see straight what the real spiritual truth really is. I mean, you want to talk about being deceived. And who are the people in the Bible and in the Quran who are always the ones who are the ultra deceived and ultimately deceive the people? Are the uber religious people from the organized sects of religion who say this is the way it is, this is what you must follow, this is what you must believe, this is what God said, this is what God is going to do, this is how it is, A to Z. And what does the Quran say about those kind of people? It says, why do you write in your own hand these words, these dictates, and then hand it to the people and say this is from God when you know it is not? And they are teaching the people to follow nothing but conjecture, the conjecture of men. And boy, is that a picture of organized religion. And so many people in our world have swallowed it hook, line, and sinker. I don't care what religion you belong to. We've all swallowed it at one point and throughout history, hook, line, and sinker. And now look what we're doing. Are we being had by the elitists and we're saying, oh, this is God? Is it something else causing this? And we're saying, oh, this is from God. If it is something else, what is it? You know, some people say, in the Buddhist belief system, they say, how we act, how we think. It's kind of like karma, I suppose, for lack of a better term. What we do, how we treat one another, how we treat the planet, it affects the environment and affects all of us. It affects our societies. But again, if that's what were happening, why is it only affecting the common people, the poor, the elderly, the young, the children, the babies? Why isn't that karma hitting the people that are really putting the bad karma out there? Something's wrong, ladies and gentlemen. And we need to start thinking about what that is. Because something isn't right about any of this. And if you're a spiritual person, if you're a religious person, even if you're not, I hope you listen to this podcast. I hope you'll share it with your family members and your friends if they happen to be spiritual or religious and they're saying, oh, it's the end of the world. Because we need to think about this. We need to ask ourselves that question. What is wrong with this picture? Because something is awfully wrong. God isn't wholesale slamming the common people and the poor and the innocent and the elderly to show his wrath, while the people responsible for so much of the trouble in the world they're not even getting a scratch through any of this. I mean, does that sound right to you? Are the elitists responsible? Or, as I said, is it something else? And in the next episode of The Spirit Side on Wednesday, we're going to talk a little bit about that something else. And it's going to go a little bit into the weeds. But again, I think this is something that we at least need to consider. Because, ladies and gentlemen, many times the truth is stranger than fiction. And I think we need to think about these things. I think we need to pray about these things. I think we need to meditate on these things. Because as I said many times already, something's off. And I think we need to start waking up and stop the religious nonsense that's been handed down to us by these organized institutions that are blinding our eyes and our minds and our hearts and our sense of good reason and logic. Because a lot of people steeped in religion aren't exercising those things at all. They're just blindly following, even though I don't go to church anymore. I don't belong to any denomination. Oh, I just pray. I just believe in God. I just believe in Christ. I just read the Bible. I just read this particular holy book. But they're still following those same worn out, passed down, false, wrapped up in a tight little bow decrees and doctrines of the organized institutions. They've just carried it with them like a virus. Just like when Martin Luther left the Catholic Church. He didn't totally get rid of Catholicism and the Reformation. He just got rid of parts of it and took a whole host of the beliefs along with him. And that's why a lot of people call it Roman Protestantism, because he took a lot of it with, and that's what a lot of people today are doing. We don't go to those religious institutions anymore, to temples or churches or mosques. It's just us and, our scriptures and our personal relationship. Well, I mean, that's a start. But we're still carrying, like a virus, a lot of those teachings with us, and we're still blind. We're still not seeing. We're still not reasoning, because we're still looking at all this going, hand of God, judgment of God, wrath of God. And we're not seeing the obvious, something stinks in the mix. I hope you enjoyed today's show. I hope you got something out of it. I hope you'll share it around and think about these things, because, ladies and gentlemen, this really is something we need to start thinking about. for our own mental health, our psychological health, our spiritual health. And we're going to talk, like I said, a little bit more about this kind of thing and maybe what it could be that's causing this on Wednesday. Maybe this will be a 3-part series that'll go throughout the week. I'm not sure. We'll see what the week brings, what happens. But until then, as always, I appreciate you listening. Please share this around. I think, again, this is a very important podcast for all of us to consider. Until next time, stay safe out there, everybody, and I'll see you on Wednesday here on the Spirit Side.